Welcome to Quarantine Zone, a podcast for HBO's The Last of Us. We are your hosts, Andrew Sorsini,
Dwayne D,
and Tosin Walken.
We just watched the 8th episode of The Last of Us, titled When We Are in Need. We assume you have as well. Total spoilers ahead. Let's dive into the aftertalk. Before we do, we've got some online spots where you can get in contact with us. You can write to us or email us a voice memo at quarantinezonepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at QZPod. Add us on iTunes, like us, leave us a review. That's how we get noticed. And of course, please spread the word, tell your friends. That's how also we get noticed. All right, this episode, When We Are in Need, was written by Craig Mazin, directed by Ali Abbasi, who's making his TV directorial debut here. He had previously directed movies such as Shelley and Border. I've seen Border. It's like folk horror. It's pretty disgusting. So I'm excited to see Ali Abbasi doing some TV work here. Dwayne, why don't you give us a brief recap of this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but obviously the show has horror elements. But this episode, I was horrified. Okay, so we open to a new character, David, a preacher reading from the Book of Revelations, chapter 21. They're in the resort town of Silverlake, which, if that is Silverlake, Colorado, it's hundreds of miles from Tommy and Maria's settlement in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's a funeral or memorial service for Alec, the man who wounded Joel 2 episodes ago and whom Joel killed. That man's daughter, Hannah, asks when they can bury her father. David, the preacher, claims the ground is too frozen, so they'll have to wait until spring. James, a follower of David, the preacher, mentioned that they're low on rations, but there might be some deer a couple miles away. The preacher agrees to a hunting party to find the deer the next day. Ellie is attending to Joel in the basement of an abandoned house somewhere away from there. She's sewn up his wound, but it's infected. They're low on food, and she's been melting snow for water. She decides to go hunt with Joel's rifle. When she's out hunting, she spots a deer and manages to shoot it. When she tracks the wounded animal down, she finds David and his man James at the side of the deer's body. She negotiates with them to split one half of the deer with them in exchange for some penicillin. They agree, and she holds David hostage while James goes back to the town to retrieve the medicine. He comes back armed, and David attempts to convince Ellie to come back to town with them. After escaping from David, the preacher, Ellie gets back to Joel, who's suffering fever and who's in and out of consciousness. She treats him with the penicillin by injecting it directly into his wound. Meanwhile, at the compound where David lives, the people are preparing for dinner, and they fret over the lack of food they have to ration. Then one of the men comes in and hands them venison, freshly butchered into pieces. It seems from the looks of the cooking staff, it's not venison, and they all know it. As they eat, the door opens, and David the preacher comes in with the full deer that Ellie killed. He addresses the rumors that Joel and Ellie are out there in the wilderness and claims he will take a party out in the morning to bring them to justice. Back at their hideout the next morning, Ellie notices something's off when she goes to collect snow for water. When she investigates, she finds a posse of men tracking her and Joel's location. Ellie attempts to lead the posse away from Joel on their horse, but the horse is shot out from under her, and despite most of the posse wanting to kill her, they take her captive at David's command. While half the posse drag captive Ellie and the dead horse back to the settlement, the others search the area for Joel. One of them finds his hideout, and despite being severely wounded, Joel manages to take him. Back at the settlement, Ellie wakes up captive. The preacher tries to win her over, but she resists, especially after she discovers that they eat their dead. The preacher reveals to her that he feels alone, despite his congregation, and that he needs Ellie to stand with him as a partner, someone to help him rule, and maybe even someone to marry him. Meanwhile, a wounded Joel has killed one of the posse and has managed to capture the 2 remaining posse members. Not only that, he managed to beat information out of them. He tracks Ellie back to the settlement. The horse they dragged back provided a trail for Joel to follow. While in the barn with the dead horse, Joel sees 3 human bodies, headless and dressed like sides of beef or venison, hanging by their feet and drying for human butchering. When Ellie refuses to marry the preacher, he and his henchman James throw her on a table for slaughter. Ellie manages to confuse them by showing them her bite mark, and then kills the henchman and escapes into the hall where the settlement all eats together. Ellie discovers she's locked inside and sets the place on fire. She manages to stab the preacher as he threatens to force himself upon her. In horror, she grasps the cleaver that he planned to use to kill her and savagely ends his life. Somehow, Ellie escapes the locked, burning building, and just as she's about to wander off into the snow, Joel finds her, and they escape into the wilderness together. And that's it. That's what's up.
What were your initial impressions of this episode?
I feel like this is an episode where, over the last several episodes, Ellie's kind of come to realize that she needs to depend on herself more, and this is the one where she really comes into her own. And at the same time, I feel like even though Ellie comes into her own, I can explain it later, but Joel actually seems to become her father, right? Which is kind of odd, right? She's becoming her own person, but Joel becomes her dad in this episode. And on top of all that, I was horrified, most of all, when I realized that, Ellie was up against a sadistic child, pedophile, cannibal guy in the guise of a preacher like that. That really threw me. I don't know that was so clear in the game that he was cannibal.
Yeah, I don't remember it being that clear. I mean, he didn't suggest in the game. He didn't suggest that they rule together and possibly join together. And when he was attacking her, it wasn't clear exactly what was going on there either. She just came out of it saying he was going to, and then she never got to finish her sentence. So we don't know.
Right, which is relatively common when it comes to unreported, sexual violence.
Right.
But at the same time, by the end of the episode, they made it clear that in our society, he was the worst of the worst. The only thing he wasn't was fascist, right? I mean, he was everything else that you would never want to be around your kids. And, he kind of put some foundation behind that when he says oh, I'm a dangerous person, I'm violent, you're violent, all that stuff. But wow. You really wanted to see him gone. And again, they don't show his face being torn apart by her cleaver. They just kind of show her going at it. And every time she hits him, in most cases they'd be enough, get out of there. But I was please just make sure. Let's just all be clear that this guy is no longer on this earth. That kind of thing. So yeah, I was floored by how evil he was. And I was reassured by the fact that Ellie could handle herself. And I adored the fact that even though she can handle herself in this episode, she basically becomes his daughter, which I'll explain after you guys drop your impressions.
Tosin, what did you think of this episode?
I really enjoyed this episode, as I have the entire series, to be honest. I'm kind of sad it's coming to a close pretty soon. I think the pacing of this episode is nice and crisp, with a good balance of action as well as sort of the drama that you have in this series. I think it was great seeing Ellie develop into her own and become her own individual who doesn't necessarily need to be saved and can, hold up the extent of her bargain and can be that sort of leader, can be that sort of focal individual. And to watch how she problem solves and how she, has become sort of this adult that she's learned a lot of skills from Joel as sort of the father figure, but also just some other things that she's developed on her own. So definitely enjoyed this episode. It's interesting to see how similar it was to the game, yet slightly different in parts, and I'm sure we'll discuss some of that later. But no, overall, solid episode. What about yourself, Andy?
Yeah, I think I have to mirror what you and Dwayne were saying in that I feel this is really the episode, and it's fitting that it's the second to the last episode, is the episode where Joel and Ellie really come into their own and are fully actualized in their journey. Ellie becoming basically a sort of mercenary self-sufficient person like Joel, and Joel finally accepting that Ellie is essentially a surrogate daughter to him, and I feel like all of those points are very intentional, and they're coming across very clearly in this episode. And I'm really enjoying it too. I feel like this is again, like, perfectly nicely paced. It's hard for me to distance myself from what I know from the game, so it's difficult for me to imagine myself in the place where I'd never seen the narrative in the game and I'm watching this new. But the good thing about that is it gives me the benefit of really noticing the differences in this telling, and a lot of those differences we'll get to later on in this podcast. But I think our showrunners are doing a fantastic job, and this is just such a fun episode.
I'm getting vibes like when I watched The Watchmen back in 2019.
Yeah,
that was a limited series. It was only 10 episodes. It wasn't going to come back, but I'm getting the kind of vibe of like every single episode is just so incredibly meaningful. That it really does feel like it just feels way more special than so many other things that are like on the. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful TV out there, but these episodes they're tight. They have action that moves the plot forward, like plot action. The violence is almost always perfectly appropriate. Like the violence in this episode, like Poston said, it was good pacing. There was a lot of violence in this episode.
Yes. Yes, but even so, less than there was in the original game. In the original game, during the sequence, there was at least, I think, two. There was at least one infected attack, and one attacked by the villagers. Basically, the villagers stalking Joel and Ellie, and both of those sequences were not present in this episode, so it's a lean retelling.
They don't need to be present because, well, I also feel like if you're playing a video game, you're kind of there for the violence, right? So when you're telling the story, it's a little different. But yeah, there's a lot of violence in this episode, and there's a lot of implied violence, right? Like these bodies hanging upside down, decapitated.
Oh yeah.
We know that Alec was eaten. But who are these other bodies, right?
Yeah.
We know that the four people that Joel encountered with Ellie, and when he killed Alec, we know that they are, at first we just thought, okay, they're like marauders. They just kind of like, they go and they raid things, they take what they can. But now there's the specter of them going out and hunting other humans to bring them back to like cut them up and eat them, just the implied violence is wild. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Joel and Ellie, like basically, like you said, Ellie becoming a surrogate. So there's this moment at the end of the show where he goes, it's okay, baby girl, I got you.
Yep.
And to me, that's the scene where it's solidified. Like it's taken all these episodes, but Joel's recognizing his role as father. And what do I mean by that? I mean, first, as a father, that whole baby girl thing is something that we say. But really, we've only ever heard him call one person that term, and that was Sarah, right?
Right.
Calling her baby girl in the first episode. And then it's worth noting, I think, here's what really lays it thick. Sarah took care of Joel, right? She like took his money. She fixed his things. She did the kinds of things that like a certain type of daughter does for a certain type of father, right? She took care of him. And in this episode, whereas before Joel's been doing everything for Ellie, Ellie's taking care of Joel. She's getting him the water. She's giving him what little jerky that they have left. She's going hunting for him. She negotiates to get him medicine, right? So she's doing the kinds of things he can't do for himself. And that's what Sarah did for him, which makes it even more appropriate to think of him as her daughter, because when people think of daughters, right, you got a 3-year-old, they need you for everything, whatever. On some level, when Joel thinks of a daughter, Sarah was his she was his baby girl, but she was also this person in his life who made his life easier on some level, and was always looking out for him as much as he was looking out for her. And so in this episode, you finally get that role fit for Ellie, where she's doing just that. And I felt that was powerful because we see it. It doesn't have to be explained. We simply, if you've been paying attention, you understand how she's taking care of Joel and what that would mean to someone like Joel, even if he's in and out of consciousness. And then that one line, "It's okay, baby girl," just like clinches it. It's a great use of visual storytelling plus text to get you to a place to recognize that this has finally happened, what we've been waiting for all season.
And this is exactly where we need to be narratively to set up the decisions that are going to be made in the final episode, which those of us who play the game have played the game know exactly what is going to go down. This is what needed to happen. We needed to have them become fully actualized in their goals, both Ellie to become self-sufficient and Joel to accept Ellie as the surrogate daughter, in order for what's about to come in the final episode.
Yeah, and I think another sort of key to that sort of dynamic is really what the show is about, and that's where you see some of those changes, right, Dwayne? Where you mentioned that we didn't have to. The game is about playing through action, and that's why there's a lot more violence and a lot more. There's the infected. Even in the game, David's group is kind of is Kathleen's group, right? David's group are those raiders that you see throughout. But the whole purpose of the show is to look at that human dynamic and what we do in
the
Apocalypse.
Different ways it presents itself, right?
And what it means to be a leader, as well as what it means to kind of have to make those hard decisions on who is worthy and who needs to be saved, and why people are saved, right? And by that I mean, the choices that bring them to the situation. I think Ellie and David at each period of point in this episode call out that, hey, it was basically fate, right, that brought them together. It was fate that had him bite. So there's this question of what is fate, and is it predefined, or can you change it? Can you adjust it if you don't agree with it?
Yeah, on some level, in this episode, you think about fate. You think about, what's Ellie's fate going to be with these people? I think of this stuff often, it's a game. So I often think of it in a D&D perspective. And when I think about fate, I'm like, okay, you roll the dice. You've got this little girl. She's going up against these people. She's got 4 shooters. You take out the horse. Yes, she's going to get caught. But then she manages to use whatever opportunity she has to basically dispatch, 2 of the most hardcore guys in the group. And so you're kind of like, is it her fate to escape, or did she just make that happen? Did she look at her situation and just say, this is not going to be what the dice rolls would say? I am not going to be a statistic. I am going to get out of here. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Tosin.
Also, Tosin, on top of that, I wanted to mention that David and Kathleen are similar in the fact that they are citing fate or something that is meant to be, but really, I think they're being disingenuous, because when they talk about what is meant to be, or God's will, or fate, they are largely manipulating the actions. So
their thumb is on the scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they're using the term fate to justify actions they've already taken. Exactly. Right? So Kathleen's like, it's not my fault that these people had to die. You know what I mean? And David's like, yeah, I'm reading Revelation 21. It's about a new heaven because death is over when you've like been, death is not a thing when you're a believer and all this stuff. And it was my fate to become a preacher because I used to be a teacher. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
Teacher and preacher. That, like she said, it rhymes, but it also kind of makes sense. They both like dispense knowledge, albeit in different ways. And then you come to find out, he's like, I'm actually an incredibly violent person, and I'm a pedophile who forces himself on young people. And it's highly likely that I only became a preacher because I could use it to control people so that I could, get what I want out of this world.
Right.
And then once all those onions are unraveled, the idea that like fate is driving this is nonsense.
Right. And Ellie and Joel are not necessarily fighting against fate. They are defending themselves. But, to that end, I wanted to mention, and sort of we talked about this in our chat when we were watching the episode, but, the Ellie and Joel, a lot of their actions are in self-defense, but in all of the casualties that Joel and Ellie leave in their wake, there have been dozens of people killed in quote self-defense by Joel and Ellie, that I can absolutely see how entire communities like the Kansas City Resistance and Silverlake are so fervent about stopping Joel and Ellie, about killing them, because they are a two-person killing machine themselves.
Well, I mean, it's self-defense with extra steps.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like he could have like tied those guys up in a way that it would take him a long time to get free.
Right.
And he's like, I believe you're a friend, which is why I stabbed him, and which is why I'm going to end your life with a pipe.
Right.
Like, I don't know that I'm calling that simple self-defense. Like, also, you got a knife right there. If you really need to get him, you could slit his wrist, slit his throat. So apparently that's more humane than ending his life with a pipe.
Well, I guess, when you are a father, or at least this father figure, and your daughter has been taken, see the Taken films.
Oh, he went
anything.
Liam Neeson on those guys.
Yeah, you will do anything to get her back. So.
I mean, and I want to get into that for a second, because I mentioned this to you guys before the show, but the fact is, 2 episodes ago, right, we meet Maria, we meet Tommy again, and both of them are given a minute maybe a piece to remind us that Joel's a very dangerous man, right? Maria's like, yo, Joel's really dangerous. He's a killer. She just straight up says it. He's a killer, Ellie. You need to watch out for him. You need to be careful. And then Tommy's like, and so Joel's like to Tommy, yeah, the things we did, Tommy. And Tommy's like, Joel, we killed people. We ended their lives. We were not good. I know you said we had to survive, but it was, again, he implied that there were extra steps, were added there. So when we get to this place where penicillin has taken care of the infection and Joel is able to end the lives of 3 armed, relatively healthy, if not a little hungry men, despite having an incredible wound in his body, it just goes to show that the ability for the show to kind of lay out the fact that this man is dangerous, and we've mentioned that he's dangerous, but now you're going to see how dangerous he is, was just incredible. I mean, even though we know that Ellie needs to save his life back in the Kathleen spot in Kansas City, he had taken out people. He's got no qualms about ending people's lives. He's totally fine with it, and he will do it on a whim to achieve his objectives. Right. And so, I think you're right. There is a. I don't know if the people of Silverlake are going to be upset at Joel because yes, he killed one of their people, but let's face it, it's unclear how much they love David as a leader. So they might have done that. He might have done them a favor.
Right.
But it's really something. And I think when you have to fight infected things in order to survive, you're like, well, I'm not going to be taken out by any regular person. And so that's just kind of who he's become. But the fact that Ellie has become super dangerous now too, like
right.
She took the initiative in her dangerousness, right? She sits there, she's holding David's hand, and she breaks a finger in an attempt to get the key. She didn't know that she could do it, but she took the initiative to try to do it. And then the whole screaming that she's infected, showing the hand, and then, grabbing a knife out of a wooden block is not easy.
Right.
And with all the force she has, because she's scared, whatever, and cutting that guy's carotid artery, whatever. And then later, the whole thing where she lunges at David and she just stabs him in like the lower left quadrant or lower left, lower right quadrant or whatever. She's dangerous. She's like a honey badger. She's just really. Right. And David knows this. David calls out, "You're a leader," like Tosin mentioned.
You have a violent heart.
Exactly. He calls out that she's got effectively violent talent, and he sees it in her. And it's unclear to me if he was really like being honest during his confessional to her, I want you as a partner, whatever. But, if he was being honest, it's all about the fact that like he sees in her qualities that are fierce enough to make her help him better control this group of people. So yeah, it was whether he wants her as a concubine or as an actual partner. I mean, she's 14. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to marry her? I don't know. But yeah, it's just wild to think about how dangerous these two people are. Like, you do not want to meet them, because unless you're Maria, you will die within 40 minutes once you meet them.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting as you kind of juxtapose the different groups and the different leadership styles across the various episodes, right? So across the series. So we've been exposed to like Kathleen's group, Marlene's Fireflies, Tommy's group and the home base there. And on one hand, they're all sort of connected by a sense of hope for what the future could be outside of, the parameters that were set in the QZ. Belonging, sort of the togetherness that we see in these groups of being one for each other, and to a varying degree, belief in their leadership. And, thirdly, like in a pursuit of what they're building for the future. And so it really kind of behooves you to think in this apocalyptic situation, like just reflecting on your own of who you are or who your friends are, who do you have faith in? Which form of leadership would sort of drive and you attach to? Mm-hmm. And where could it potentially lead you? And, I think David's group, right, we see, especially after seeing sort of Tommy's group, they're cast in sort of a harsher environment, cold, stark, dark, not enough light. When we came from Tommy's group and you saw, there was snow, it was snowing, but there was levity. There was trees, light, Christmas tree, celebration, happy youth.
Uh-huh. And so it's like resource constrained, and the types of it's like the show is showing us resource constraints and the types of leadership that come out of that. In all these cases, we see different types of leadership, right? So, Fedra is fascist, and then you've got your reign of terror going on under Kathleen, and then you have the commune situation, which we still don't really know if there's a dark secret there, but so far so good with the commune situation with Maria and Tommy. And then you get to the effectively like the use of fundamentalist Christianity to control people, and all these things are systems of social systems. And at least in the case of David, his personal power was about to be used to totally abuse another person and to get away with it. I mean, he walked up to that one girl and hit her and was like, "I'm your father," and that like father stuff is
very cultish.
It's tied to like a certain type of like patriarchal power.
Right.
So you do find that in fascism, but you also find it in, like what you said, cults or like religious extremists, and in tribal spaces, right? So you find it there. With Kathleen, she gave the appearance of collaboration. She gave the appearance of we're all in this together, we're all taking down Phaedra together.
Yeah.
But her agenda was really all that mattered. And then with Phaedra, it's clearly like, we meet the officer that's like teaching Ellie how to be Phaedra and all that stuff. And it's clear that there's like a social hierarchy, there's a bureaucracy here and everything. But at the end of the day, there's no real freedom. Whereas in the one place that we've been, especially as Americans, taught that freedom doesn't exist, in the commune, they're democratically elected leaders running the commune. And yeah, I mean, it's just interesting how they've laid out these different social organizations and how effective they are in their particular universe, which is fictional, right? So it's totally worth noting.
Yeah, and also even with like Kathleen's group, Perry, one of the driving forces is the folks that you gather around. How much do they support and how much do they believe in you? David has to ask James if he's with him, right? Yeah. And he's like, I can sense some doubt in you. While Kathleen, although she had her own agenda, Perry, her second-hand man, noted that the company is with her and that that she is their savior, right? She is their priest, and there's more belief and dedication in her. So, you also have the various forms of leadership styles and leadership goals, even though in both those cases, those individuals had sort of kind of cold-hearted beliefs and cold-hearted.
They were abusive, yeah.
Thinking of like, quote, maybe that's God's will, right? Is what was said here, and that's leaving her to die. Kathleen would have agreed, right? Similar vibes, right? So yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is like really interesting and kind of compelling, and how we get to see and experience that sort of dynamic across the various groups here, and it's a harsh reality, to be honest, because that's really what the world is, and I think that's reflected in this show.
I hope that's not what the world is, but I see what you mean.
It's interesting to note in that scene that you mentioned, Tosin, in particular, where James is questioning David by saying, well, maybe that's God's will, that David glares at him, implying that David shouldn't be questioned and that only David is capable of interpreting God's will. There's a lot of
amount of
right.
Ahead, sorry.
There's a lot of like cult red flags that pop up in this episode with David.
When he pauses and glares at him, and then he talks about everything. Like basically, he says they didn't have faith in me, and James is like, I have faith in you. Then they're out there, and it's like maybe it's God's will, and then David again is like, I can't trust you right now, and then James is about to shoot Ellie in the head, and David has to pull his gun up and shoot in the air and stop everybody. So David's ability to control this organization has everything to do with having men like James follow him. But he's got a situation where people like James are kind of going their own way, trying to interpret the God thing, killing Ellie when he doesn't want her killed. And so his grip on power is like that's how I see his grip on power being much looser and weaker than Kathleen's grip on power, because Perry had the faith in her, So just some examples of how you can see those differences, despite them both being kind of dictators or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the fact that he looked at James so hard when he even dared to mention that maybe God's will was something that that David wasn't into. That was serious.
Yeah, you guys noticed how David also got more food than anyone else, right?
Yeah.
Adding to that sort of like cultish leadership vibe that they tossed in there.
Can we talk about that for a second? The whole cannibalism thing. A couple things I wanted to note that I thought was really interesting is that when
What, you thought he was a fine young cannibal?
He was a fine young cannibal. That reference
You
will mean
drive me
nothing
crazy.
to yes. Like a few things. Like I feel like it's like the whole village is kind of in a state of self-denial. Like they secretly know what's going on, but they're also like there really isn't any other choice. So we're sort of tacitly agreeing to this charade, this sort of self-delusion, the self-denial that we're in. Like when Joyce, who was helping in the kitchen, asked Josiah, who's the butcher, when she asked, "What is it?" And Josiah takes like a moment or two to hesitate before he answers her and says, "It's venison." And then she gives a look. Like, I'm pretty sure she suspects that it's not venison, but she doesn't want to dig too deep. And I feel like that that the whole town is kind of going through that. You know, when it's interesting.
That's how cults work, man.
Yeah, totally.
It's an open secret that the savior is the one that's diddling the children and all that stuff.
Right,
you know?
right. You see when David gives the prayer, the grace, and everyone starts to eat, like you can hear the din of all the spoons hitting the dishes. It's like everyone's greedily scarfing down their evening meal, except for the one or two of David's close right hand men who absolutely know without a doubt what's going on, and they're still eating, but they're very hesitant about eating. You know,
and hunger does crazy things to you. I mean, what do they say? They say a revolution is only 3 meals away.
Yeah.
At any given time. And so also there's just this idea that like if you're in this situation, this post-apocalyptic situation, whatever group you fall into is whatever group you fall into. It takes an extraordinary amount of self-determination to extricate yourself from a place like Boston to get to Kansas City, to get to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. People are afraid, people are looking for protection, and that's what David seems to be offering. So if the meat tastes a little funny, at least you're eating meat, you're not on your own.
Right.
And David knows that, which is why he constantly tries to gaslight Ellie that she's on her own, that she can't survive by herself, that she needs a group. And Ellie's not having it,
Right.
So, but they're using that situation, this terrible situation, they make you crisis, don't let it go to waste kind of thing, to abuse people and to make them think that they really need him. And that's crazy. And also the whole thing, like, who's a believer, right? The faith. He says his prayer, and these people don't even seem to care. They're like, I just got to eat. If this is what it takes to eat, then that's fine.
Also, I think, David, I feel like he talked about having been a teacher, and he didn't really find the faith. He didn't really become a preacher until after the fall. So it's I feel like he really
pure opportunism.
Absolutely. He betrays his motivations. Like when he said, what was I supposed to do? Let them starve? These people who put their lives in my hands, who expect me to keep them safe, who love me. It's that last bit, who love me. That's
Ellie's like, yeah, let them starve.
That's really what he's interested in. He's interested in retaining their devotion. He's more interested in retaining their devotion than he's interested in their welfare. He is definitely selfish. He keeps insisting that he's a decent man and he's good. He's protesting too much. He craves more respect from the villagers than he's receiving. He needs to be a leader.
Yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree there. It's sort of, once again, he has that sort of creepy vibe, and I noted that exact line where it's like, oh, he like, there's that pause between where he's like, keep them safe, and then it's like, who love me, right? So desiring that, like, the adoration And also, to be honest, he later on goes to say to Ellie, you do need a father, so I'm going to keep you, and I'm going to teach you. And
it's self-delusion. He's deluded himself into thinking that he's got this role, right? When he slaps that girl, it's like, you've always had a father. Even if your father's dead, I'm your father. And like, no one fucking believes that he's her father.
And, she already does have someone who she believes in and wholeheartedly as her father figure. And, Ellie, instinctively says, like, fuck no, and, smashes his face in, because that's not what she doesn't need that individual.
Right.
It's also quite interesting that he says that there's no fear in love, but as
he attempts to take off her clothes and have his way with her. Yeah, because he wants her consent. He's like Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine. If only the Bajorans appreciated what I've done for them, as he takes all their resources. So he's literally like, don't be afraid as I take off your clothes, because he wants the veneer of consent. Just like he wants the veneer of fatherhood for everybody. He wants the veneer of love. He's like, if there's enough of the veneer, then nobody knows it's not a real thing. This is exactly how people consolidate political power. Right. And he's doing exactly that. And then also speaking of his,
going back to that, right? Although he does say that, and that is his sort of excuse, I think throughout the course of the show, we have seen that that love and fear are intertwined, right?
Bill makes that very clear in episode 3. He's like, I wasn't afraid of anything until I had to take care of you, so I fell in love with you, right?
Yeah, and Ellie has had that sort of fear for Joel that he's going to die, and you see it just throughout the course of the show. So instinctively, he's wrong. He is completely wrong about that aspect.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's a liar. And so he does it. What's also interesting is when he confronts Ellie. So he's like, everyone loves me, whatever. And then she's like, why are you telling me all this? And he's like, because you can handle it in a way the others can't. They need God, they need heaven, they need a father. You don't. You're beyond that.
Right.
And I thought that was super interesting, because he basically realized that he couldn't coax Ellie along the way he coaxes other people along. Ellie's not living in fear the way the others are living in fear, so he can't manipulate her that way. But the good news, the silver lining he saw was, I may not be able to manipulate you, but I can teach you how to manipulate them. And then you and I can consolidate power together. Right. Mostly because I don't trust James anymore. And so, what's also interesting about that, he ends with they need a father, you don't, you're beyond that. So here he's saying that she doesn't need a father. And on some level, he's right. She's an orphan, and she and Joel came to an understanding 2 episodes ago. And it's like, well, I'm not your dad, whatever, right? Even though they were lying to themselves. So she's not Sarah, and he's not her dad. But also, by the end of this episode, he's her dad. By the end of this episode, she's Sarah. So it's almost like David was a catalyst for them to, like you said, become fully realized. Right. David was a catalyst for them to sort of realize what they are to one another. Mm-hmm. Going through, the ringer of David, having to recover from one of his men getting stabbed, having to escape from being cannibalized if you're Ellie, and then escape from being, sexually abused if you're Ellie, and then escape from being murdered if you're Ellie. It's just all those things just so you can see Joel again. Right. So it was really, it was harrowing. I don't know how you guys watched it without being upset.
That was very upsetting. I did want to talk about one of the major, probably the most fundamental difference in this episode between this episode and the way the game is laid out. In the video game, David climbs on top of Ellie and starts to assault her. And Ellie is pinned down and helpless. And then suddenly Joel comes up behind David and beats him out of consciousness. Basically beats him to death. Right?
It's a classic Han Solo move, right? Luke is about to get hit by Darth Vader, and out of nowhere Han Solo comes and and disables Darth Vader's ship, allowing Luke to be free. Right. This is the kind of same thing. Like if you watched The Dark Knight Returns, the dude Bane is about to take out Batman again, and then suddenly Catwoman shoots him. From afar.
But that's not how it goes down in this episode.
Right. They flip it on its head. The third example I was going to give was, Star Trek: The Next Generation, All Good Things. Those final episode, they're in a situation where they're getting attacked, and there's another ship coming out of warp, and it's of course the Enterprise that helped them. You know what I mean? In all these cases, the big good guy shows up and yay, we're going to be saved. Right? He's got a +1 to every attack. But in this case, they flip it on its head, and you were going to explain that, Andy.
Yeah. So in this case, I think that having it go down like that in this telling of it would remove the agency from Ellie. It would make her once again not having to rely on Joel to get her out of her predicament, and by Ellie going through shock and rage and bursting out and dispatching David herself, there's a couple things that happen. Like, she truly becomes self-actualized. She really does become now a killer like Joel, like someone who will do what needs to be done to both save herself and to get the upper hand on her enemies. And secondly,
also recognizing her enemies, right? Like I feel like that's one thing that so many characters don't do. The recognition of who an enemy is, especially when you got someone like David who's trying to be your friend and then your husband. So yeah, she doesn't trust anybody. They're all her enemy.
And it also fulfills this this impending threat that we've had from the very beginning when Ellie witnessed Joel taking out the guard in the Fedra guard outside of Boston. There was this light in her eyes of her being enticed with the idea of violence.
She's oh shit, he keeps it real.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
So it's come full circle now, and she has completely fulfilled that violent heart, as David put it, which is quite different from the way it goes down in the game, and quite different from the Ellie that's portrayed in the video game. So it's kind of fascinating to see this.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, it's been modernized. It's 10 years later. And I think when you look at the way women are depicted on screen, things have changed a bit. And so they're trying to incorporate some of that. It's like the way that LGBTQ characters are depicted in mainstream media is different than they were 10 years ago. And, maybe the show tries to pick up on that too. So we're getting this kind of modernization update, and people like Druckmann, the creator, are getting to update their work or maybe even put things into the work that weren't possible back in the day, put things into the work that have only come up after seeing it and staring at it for 10 years. Like we could augment this. And then of course the idea of the storytelling on the screen at home is different from the storytelling that you need in the video game. So it's all pretty powerful.
It also makes me wonder if we should be expecting a different final episode than in the game too, in that respect. Because I know how things go down.
Get it past them. I mean,
yeah. So
as long as it's not like Game of Thrones, I'm good.
Yeah. Right. Well, so long as no one hands the throne to Bran, at the end of this, I think we're going to be okay. But I'm really curious because the game does go down in a certain way between Ellie and Joel, and I'm really curious now, having seen this fundamental change in Ellie, how those events are going to go down between Joel and Ellie in the final episode.
I mean, speaking of some of the other changes that they made in this episode, we here, we see Joel actually get discovered and has to kind of kill someone. In the other game, he kind of he heals up and escapes, goes out and notices that she's missing and goes around and basically shoots people up. But one of the big points, which is really interesting, is in the game, as she's kind of repeatedly stabbing David, Joel comes in and stops her from going through the action of further massacring this guy, and comforts her. And in this instance, rather than being the one to bring her down from that place, she manages to do that on her own and manages to kind of leave on her own. And as she has
more agency,
as she's about to collapse in the snow, he's there to comfort her. So an interesting change to, as you mentioned, give her agency, give her more, make sure that she is completely her own savior and doesn't feel like there's a requirement for Joel to be around. That was very interesting.
I just want to jump quickly on, you said, he found her in the forest. In so many shows, it's so difficult to understand how a person like Joel could find a person like Ellie in all that wilderness, in all, over all those miles, whatever. But in this particular episode, they did some things that were clever, that were understated, that really made things work for me. One of them is, she ran into those guys after she shot the deer, and they followed the blood trail to the deer. They found it, right? So that's how they ended up with one another. He told those guys to go door to door, which is how they ended up finding Joel, and Joel got the information out of them. In addition, it might have been snowing, but when you drag a horse in the snow to your compound or whatever, it's gonna leave a trail. So, you're like, how did Joel find the town? It's like, there's a trail from this horse being dragged, and you see it for a second, like the blood, the deep, gash in the snow where the horse has been dragged. And then finally, when Ellie is burning down Todd's steakhouse, a kind of testament to Tad's steakhouse. Obviously, if you see a burning building and you're missing your little girl, you're going to go to that building first and check it out. And so, I think it was really cool how they had these ways of marking territory so that it wasn't unfeasible for Joel to be able to track and find her. They don't need to be, Norman Reedus in The Walking Dead being the sole person who can track wild animals or anything like that. It was straight up there's a big track where they dragged the horse, and here's where the building's burning. I'm going to these places. And I thought that was pretty clever from a suspension of disbelief space. I could have sworn when she is pulling out the gun to track that deer in the beginning, I could have sworn I heard a clicker.
Yeah, I don't think I did, but I know
I heard something clicking, and I was like, "Oh, is there one in the woods or whatever?" And
I know during the same sequence in the video game, there is a David and Ellie are attacked by clickers while they're waiting in the abandoned cabin.
Yeah, see, there it is. I mean, they could have heightened up tension by having some infected try to move that thing and find Joel.
Yeah.
And yada yada yada, but they didn't have to because the tension was already there. So, pretty powerful stuff.
The last thing I'll cover is, once again we have that sort of window motif that we see coming through in every episode. There's a period of time where Ellie is right by Joel as he's sleeping, and you see the light kind of shining on her while Joel is still in this darkness. Right, he's still on the edge of death, while Ellie is, sort of bathed in a little light. And you also know progressively through that scene, some of that light starts to shine on Joel a little bit, kind of maybe showing that he is starting to heal, because this is around the time when it's just giving him the medicine and other things. So just interesting seeing that little touch that they added there.
Okay, let's move on to some technical aspects. where we talk about some of the behind-the-scenes elements we enjoyed in this episode, like music, acting, visuals, etc. Very importantly, guys, James, David's right-hand man, is played by Troy Baker, who was the voice of Joel in the video game.
I mean, they keep on using these actors, these voice actors. Like Marlene played Marlene, and now this Troy guy's playing Situation. It's great.
Troy Baker is like the Harrison Ford of the video game world, because he has played the lead character in The Last of Us. He has played the lead character in the Uncharted series. He played the lead character in BioShock Infinite. He's like a heavy hitter for these major narrative.
The Tom Hanks of major narrative.
Exactly. So,
and he hosts the official Last of Us podcast. So.
That's correct.
But yeah, no, I think he does a great job. I really enjoy
these guys are so scary. Yeah,
that they give these individuals who are primarily voice actors in many cases a chance to shine on screen, and I think they do. He along with the others that they've called in have done an excellent job. So. Props to them.
Let's talk about some ephemera. These are links and extra textual connections that help you enhance the enjoyment of this episode. Tosin, you wanted to mention Station 11?
Yeah, so Station 11 is another limited series that HBO released, and throughout the course of this episode, I was kind of getting some vibes around Station 11, more around David and his persona, and sort of how he notes that, hey, he started a group of he started by leading a group of individuals, and there's throughout the apocalypse, that group kept gaining. There's several individuals in Station 11 which could be referenced here as sort of this David character. Sort of one in particular that I think of, without giving too much spoilers, is an airport episode, and this guy is sort of leaning on the guise of having a higher calling and a higher mission. If you guys know what I'm talking about there,
I do, because I've seen it.
So I think Station 11 is also an incredible series, highly worth watching. I know Dwayne does not agree, but critically acclaimed. So,
but Dwayne also hasn't seen the entire series. So.
You don't have to see the entire series to know that an entire series isn't worth seeing. That's the difference between like a movie where it's like, okay, well, I already started it, so I might as well see what's going on here. I might turn around. But like, you can't just keep on giving time to things that don't make you happy. Right? And I'm not going to get the time back. So I can end it and be like, see, I told you I didn't like it.
I apologize that it didn't make you happy up until the point that you stopped watching.
Yeah, to each their own. But I would still recommend this to.
I respect the fact that it's critically acclaimed. It just isn't for everybody, especially people who fall asleep during it.
Ouch!
Consistently, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not critically acclaimed. It's critically acclaimed, but like, I tell you this, I would crack open Watchmen anytime over Station 11, and I would crack open The Last of Us anytime over Station 11, and so that's kind of where I'm at. So highly recommended by Tosin, not recommended by me.
Highly recommended by Tosin and Andy.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Yeah,
I'm the minority report. I'm okay with that.
Dwayne, you wanted to bring up Revelations chapter 21.
Yeah, so this is the chapter in Revelations that talks about a new heaven and a new life and all the promises that happen if only you're just good in the eyes of God after you die, right? And he was leaning on that. He kept on saying that for multiple people. He did mention at the beginning, David, that they'd lost so many people in the last however long. And so he'd been giving the speech a lot. And so this idea of this world is rough, but don't worry, the next world is going to be fine. Your dad is really dead. He's alive in heaven. All that stuff. It's just kind of like this mollifying content. And to give you, to just underscore better that the people didn't really love him or buy into it, he asks Hannah, hey, Hannah, Revelations 21, do you know how it ends? She's like, no, I don't know, which means she just hasn't been paying attention when she's gone through all these other funerals for other people. So it's it was an interesting choice for them, Revelation 21. Yeah.
I think that's going to do it for this episode of Quarantine Zone. I'm going to go around the table, and I'll start with you, Dwayne, and ask, where can people find your work on the internet when you're not talking about The Last of Us?
Check me out on Twitter, twitter.com/DwayneD, and maybe on Mastodon too. Tosin, what about you?
You can check me at twitter.com/toast4321, but most of my happenings these days are on Instagram, where I'm posting photos and various works of art at BurntToast45. What about yourself, Andy?
You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at Mr. Babyman. That's my handle. And those places you can see what I'm liking, linking, and posting throughout there. As far as Quarantine Zone goes, our Twitter and Facebook are QZPod. We are on all major podcast distribution networks. Add us, tell your friends. And join us next week when we cover the final episode of this season of The Last of Us, which is titled Look for the Light. Until then, please drop us an email.
Don't go into the light.
Don't go into the light. Stay away from the light, Carol Ann. Until then, please drop us an email or tweet us and leave us a comment on iTunes, and we are going to see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us.